the day I drove my harvester over her Cadillac. The sun was barely up, painting the Iowa cornfields in shades of gold, when I first heard the crunch of gravel under tires. I was on my porch, nursing a mug of black coffee that had gone lukewarm, watching the world wake up. My farm, a patchwork of green fields and red barns, had been in my family for 3 generations. It was the kind of place where the air smelled of earth and effort, and the only drama came from a cow getting loose or a storm rolling in. That morning, though, trouble pulled up in a cherry-red Cadillac Escalade, gleaming like it had just rolled off a showroom floor. I'm Tom Hargrove, 58, a farmer who spent more years wrangling cattle than dealing with people's nonsense. But nonsense was exactly what Deborah Mitchell brought with her. She'd moved to our small town of Willow Creek a year ago, trailing her tech millionaire husband, Victor, in a cloud of entitlement thick enough to choke a horse. Deborah was the kind of woman who thought rural life was an Instagram backdrop, not a way of living. She'd been stirring up trouble ever since she arrived, pushing for organic-only lawns and yoga retreats that nobody in town had asked for. That morning, she'd come to the farmer's market, where I sell eggs, milk, and the occasional jar of honey. I was setting up my stall when she stormed in, her designer yoga pants practically glowing under the market tent. She was furious about a missing jar of local clover honey she'd pre-ordered. "You're hoarding it for your cows, aren't you?" she snapped, loud enough for half the market to hear. I chuckled. Me cows do love a sweet treat, but that only set her off more. Her face turned as red as her Cadillac, and she launched into a tirade, accusing me of sabotaging her wellness vision. By the time she stormed off, promising I'd regret this, the whole town was whispering. I didn't think much of it. Deborah's tantrums were as common as flies in July. But when I got back to my farm that afternoon, I saw her Cadillac parked tight against my barn door, so close it was kissing the padlock. No note, no apology, just a wall of luxury SUV blocking the only way to get my cows out for feeding and air. The barn was a sauna in the summer heat, and my 20 head of cattle were already bawling, their low moans echoing through the wood. I tried calling her. No answer. Texted. Nothing. I even walked to her yoga retreat a half-mile away, but her assistant, a guy with a man bun and a fake smile, brushed me off with practiced hostility. By noon, the barn was hitting dangerous temperatures. I'd installed fans, but without the doors open, the air was stifling. My cows weren't just uncomfortable, they were at risk of heat stroke. I called the sheriff, hoping they could tow the car, but they said it was private property, so their hands were tied without a court order. That could take days. My cows had hours, maybe less. I called my friend Hank, a grizzled mechanic who'd seen every kind of trouble in Willow Creek. "You got that old John Deere gassed up?" he asked, a grin in his voice. He was talking about my harvester, a beast of a machine with blades wide enough to clear a field in one pass and an engine that roared like Judgment Day. I'd only used it for big jobs, but it was sitting in the shed, ready to roll. I didn't jump into action right away. I taped a polite note to the Cadillac's windshield, giving Deborah one last chance to move it. I waited an hour. Nothing. I drove to town, hoping she'd come to her senses. But there she was, lounging under a canopy with her yoga crowd, sipping kombucha and laughing like she hadn't a care in the world. That's when I knew. This wasn't about a parking mistake. This was Deborah flexing her power, trying to teach me a lesson. I called Ellen, a retired lawyer who'd swapped courtrooms for a goat farm. She read me the state's agriculture laws over the phone. In an emergency, I had the right to use necessary equipment to ensure livestock welfare. "Film everything," she said, "and wear a nice hat." I like that last part. Back at the farm, I rallied Hank, Ellen, and a young intern named Jake, who helped with milking. They brought phones, lawn chairs, and a jug of sweet tea. I climbed into the harvester, adjusted the seat, and turned the key. The engine roared to life, shaking the ground. I rolled forward, slow and steady, the blades glinting in the sun. The first nudge was gentle, a tap against the Cadillac's bumper. It creaked like a tin can. The second was firmer. The hood crumpled, and a side mirror snapped off. Jake was filming, Hank was muttering "holy smokes," and Ellen whispered, "This is better than HBO." By the time the front end of the Cadillac was a twisted mess, I had enough space to swing the barn doors open. Fresh air rushed in, and the cows' bellows turned to relieved moos. I parked the harvester, stepped out, and looked at the wreckage. It was horrifying and satisfying all at once. Deborah had picked a fight with the wrong farmer, and I'd answered with steel. Jake uploaded the video to social media, and by nightfall, it was spreading like wildfire. Cadillac Crunch trended, and the memes were brutal. Deborah didn't know yet, but she was about to find out what happens when you block a farmer's barn during feeding time. The next morning, the sun rose over Willow Creek like it always did, casting long shadows across my fields. But the calm was deceptive. I was feeding the goats when I heard a sound that could have woken the Diata high-pitched wail that sent my ducks scattering into the pond. Deborah had returned to the scene of her Cadillac's demise. The SUV sat in front of my barn, its front end crumpled like a discarded soda can, the cherry red paint chipped and peeling. She stood there in designer flip-flops, her face a mix of fury and disbelief, shrieking as if the world had ended. I stayed by the fence, sipping my coffee, watching her meltdown unfold. Deborah was already filming herself, phone angled for maximum drama. "This man destroyed my car," she cried, tears streaming on cue. "He's a menace. A violent, rural barbarian." She paced in front of the wreckage, gesturing wildly, her voice pitched for her social media audience. It was a performance worthy of an Oscar, if Oscars were given for self-inflicted victimhood. I let her rant. When she finally noticed me, she stormed over, still recording, her eyes blazing. "You're going to jail, Tom Hargrove," she snapped. "Do you know how much that Cadillac cost? My husband's lawyer will bury you." I pointed to a laminated sheet I'd taped to the barn door, a printout of Iowa's emergency livestock access law, highlighted and underlined. "Read it," I said calmly. Her lips moved as she scanned the page, but her expression didn't change. "That's not real," she spat. "You can't just crush someone's car." I shrugged and walked back to the barn. She shouted after me, hurling insults about my backward ways, but I didn't bite. This wasn't about her Cadillac anymore. It was about my cows, my land, and the principle of doing what's right when lives depend on it. Deborah wanted a stage, and I wasn't going to be her prop. By mid-morning, the circus arrived. A news van from Des Moines pulled up, its satellite dish gleaming. A reporter in heels tiptoed through the cow pies, microphone in hand, asking for my side of the story. I kept it short. I opened the barn to save my animals. I filmed it because I knew she'd sue. The law's on my side. Then I went back to work, mucking stalls and checking the goats. Deborah, meanwhile, gave 3 interviews, each more theatrical than the last. She clutched her yoga mat like a lifeline, wore a shirt that read peaceful, not powerless, and claimed the sound of my harvester had given her PTSD. She even said the machine's aggressive energy triggered her childhood trauma. The internet ate it up, dubbing her Cadillac Cassie and remixing her scream into dance tracks. The town hadn't seen this much excitement since a tractor parade got stuck behind a runaway pig. Ellen and Hank stopped by at noon, Ellen with a tray of lemon bars and a stack of legal printouts. She'd dug up 2 more state laws backing my actions, including one about heat-related livestock emergencies. "She's got nothing," Ellen said, grinning. Hank scrolled through his phone, chuckling at a meme of my harvester wearing a superhero cape with the caption, "Don't mess with the moo protector." The sheriff arrived that afternoon, not to arrest me, but to document the scene. Deborah's lawyer had filed for a civil investigation, claiming vehicular intimidation. I handed over my footage, the vet's statement about heatstroke risks, and a weather report showing a heat index of 105 degrees Fahrenheit that day. The sheriff, a tired-looking man named Carl, took it all with a nod. Off the record, he muttered, "I'd have done the same damn thing." Deborah wasn't done, though. She turned to the Willow Creek Homeowners Association, where she held sway like a queen. The HOA was mostly retirees who liked golf and quiet, not drama. But Deborah had been pushing them around for months, banning flagpoles and mandating earthy paint colors. Now, she tried to weaponize them against me, filing a complaint about my dangerous machinery. I got wind of it when a neighbor, Mrs. Larson, called to warn me. "She's saying you're a threat to the community," she said. "But don't worry, Tom. Nobody's buying it." What Deborah didn't know was that her HOA power play was already crumbling. She'd submitted her complaint with signatures from neighbors who hadn't attended the meeting. A county clerk, tipped off by the viral video, noticed the same pen stroke on 5 different names. By evening, the HOA was in chaos, with board members distancing themselves from her. One even called me to say, "We're not backing her. She's on her own." As the sun set, casting a golden glow over the barn and the mangled Cadillac, I felt a flicker of peace. Not because it was over, it wasn't, but because Deborah had underestimated something bigger than my harvester, a town that sticks together. That night, I saw a post from her on social media, a candlelit video where she whispered about forgiving me for my hard life. She ended with a tearful namaste, but forgot to mute her mic before hissing, "I hope his cows choke on their feed." The comments tore her apart, and I shut my phone off, smiling. The Cadillac stayed where it was, a dented trophy of what happens when arrogance parks in front of responsibility. The next day, things escalated. Deborah's husband, Victor, sent a letter through his lawyer, threatening a lawsuit for property damage and emotional distress. I wasn't worried. Dylan's binders were thicker than their egos, but it was clear Deborah was digging in for a fight. What she didn't know was that I'd already taken steps to protect my land, steps that would turn her next move into a disaster. The Willow Creek Courthouse was a squat, wood-paneled building that smelled of stale coffee and old paper. It wasn't built for high-stakes drama. Judge Harlan usually handled fence disputes or tax complaints, but on that Tuesday morning, it was packed. Word of the Cadillac crunch had spread beyond Iowa, and folks from as far as Cedar Rapids showed up to see Deborah Mitchell face off against me, Tom Hargrove, the farmer who'd turned her SUV into modern art. Deborah sat across the room, dressed in a beige blazer and a neck brace she hadn't worn the day before. Her lawyer, a slick guy named Preston who looked like he'd rather be golfing, flipped through a thin folder of notes. I walked in with Ellen, my retired lawyer friend, carrying 3 binders stuffed with evidence: animal care logs, weather data, vet statements, and time-stamped video of the incident. Hank and Jake, my milking intern, sat in the back, ready to cheer or jeer as needed. Deborah's lawyer opened with a performance that rivaled her social media videos. He claimed I'd caused irreversible psychological distress and willful destruction of property valued at $120,000. Deborah dabbed her eyes, saying I'd weaponized my harvester to bully her and that she'd been trapped by my rage, unable to move her car. When Judge Harlan asked why she'd parked in front of a barn door with 3 "Do Not Block" signs, she stammered about needing perfect lighting for a yoga photo shoot. The judge scribbled something down, his face unreadable. Ellen took the floor next, calm as a summer morning. She presented Iowa's emergency livestock access law, citing the clause that allowed necessary equipment to protect animal welfare. She showed temperature records hitting 105 degrees Fahrenheit, the vet's warning about heat stroke, and my security footage, complete with the cow's desperate bellows in the background. When we played the audio, the courtroom went silent, the sound of suffering animals cutting through Deborah's theatrics. Her lawyer tried to interrupt, claiming emotional harm, but Judge Harlan raised a hand. "Did your client attempt to move the vehicle after multiple contacts?" he asked. Preston had no answer. The judge said he'd review the case, but noted the evidence heavily favored my actions as justified. Deborah's smug facade cracked for a moment, her lips twitching as she realized her narrative was unraveling. Outside, reporters swarmed. Deborah tried to dodge them, but one caught her with a microphone, asking about the Cadillac Cassie memes. She snapped that it was an invasion of privacy and stormed to her rental car. The wrecked Cadillac was still in my driveway, now evidence for her insurance claim. Back at the farm, I thought the worst was over. The cows were fine, the news cycle was shifting, and the town was rallying behind me. But Deborah wasn't one to quit. A few days later, I found a letter shoved under my door, not mailed, just stuffed there like a taunt. It was from the Willow Creek HOA, citing a new bylaw restricting heavy machinery within 600 feet of their community boundary. They'd redrawn their map overnight, extending their edge to my fence line. I knew Deborah's handiwork when I saw it. She'd lost in court, so she was trying to choke me with bureaucracy. I called Ellen, who laughed when she read the letter. "They can't touch you," she said. "My grandfather had registered a right-of-way easement 50 years ago, giving me legal access to my land that no HOA could override." Still, it was a hassle. I spent days digging through county records, hiring a surveyor, and filing objections. Then Hank called with worse news. Deborah had submitted a rezoning request, labeling my farm a semi-commercial operation. If approved, I'd face noise ordinances, equipment restrictions, and compliance costs that could cripple me. Her goal was clear: make my life hell until I sold the farm. I was ready to fire up the harvester again when Hank's niece, who worked at the county zoning office, called. She'd spotted something fishy in Deborah's rezoning petition. One signature belonged to a town official who died 2 years ago. Another was from a resident who'd moved to Florida. The ink matched across all signatures, and the dates were off. It was fraud, plain and simple. We filed a report with the county ethics board, and within days, they launched an investigation, freezing all HOA actions tied to the petition. Deborah's empire was crumbling. She stopped showing up to her yoga retreats, and her face vanished from local flyers. Rumors spread that the HOA was forcing her out to avoid criminal charges. A neighbor, Mr. Thompson, stopped by to apologize, saying he'd been roped into her schemes without knowing the extent. "She fooled us all," he said, shaking his head. I accepted his apology but kept my guard up. Deborah wasn't the type to slink away quietly. Sure enough, she fired one last shot. My insurance company got a claim from her, alleging emotional distress and environmental disruption from my harvester's negative energy. My agent, a no-nonsense woman named Carla, laughed so hard she nearly dropped the phone. The claim was denied on the spot. Still, the constant pressure was wearing me down. I started locking my gates at dusk and checking the barn doors twice. I had a feeling Deborah was planning something bigger, and I wasn't wrong. One evening, as I sat by the pond watching my ducks squabble, a black sedan pulled up at the edge of my property. A man in a suit stepped out, scanned the farm, and made a call. He didn't approach, just drove off. The next day, I got a notice from a company called Serenity Fields LLC, expressing interest in building a wellness retreat next to my south pasture. The name on the registration? Victor Mitchell, Deborah's husband. She was coming at me from a new angle, and this time, she was playing for keeps. But I'd learned her game. Weeks earlier, I'd filed a provisional conservation easement on my southern boundary, a state program that protected farmland from development. The inspection was done, and the paperwork was approved. That easement blocked any construction within 100 feet of my land, exactly where Victor's retreat was planned. I wasn't just ready for Deborah's next move. I was one step ahead. The letter from Serenity Fields LLC arrived in a glossy folder that screamed money, with gold-embossed lettering promising transformative wellness. Inside was a proposal to build a holistic retreat next to my south pasture yoga domes, meditation pavilions, and something called sound bathing. That sounded like a fancy way to nap. The renderings showed serene people strolling barefoot on gravel paths, but I wasn't fooled. The name at the bottom was Victor Mitchell, Deborah's husband, and this was her latest attempt to bury my farm under her vision of a wellness empire. I leaned back in my kitchen chair, the Iowa wind rattling the windows, and studied the documents. The plan looked polished: zoning petitions, architectural drafts, even letters of endorsement. But something felt off. There'd been no public notices, no outreach to neighboring landowners like me. I cross-checked their zoning application with the county's online system and found a dozen red flags, missing dates, and signed plats, and surveys that were flat-out fabricated. Their proposed boundary line was off by several feet, creeping onto my land. Deborah thought she could sneak this through, but she'd miscalculated. I'd already filed a conservation easement on my southern boundary weeks ago, when Deborah's HOA stunt started. The state's agricultural protection program locked that land as farmland, blocking any development within a 100-foot buffer zone. The inspector had walked my fields, checked my irrigation routes, and approved the easement in record time. That buffer zone covered every inch of Victor's proposed retreat site. Their plan was dead before it started. But I didn't stop there. Deborah's filings claimed they'd dig 2 wells and redirect runoff from my pasture into their filtration pond. That wasn't just bold, it was illegal without my consent. It would have flooded my irrigation trench every time it rained, ruining my crops. I called the Agricultural Extension Office, and they connected me with a hydrologist, Hank's cousin, of all people. We used drone footage and drainage records to prove the retreat would violate Iowa's water protection laws. I sent the report to the county board, copying the local newspaper. Within days, the story exploded. Wellness retreat threatens family farm's water supply hit the front page of the Willow Creek Gazette, and online forums lit up with outrage. Animal rights groups, local farmers, and even a veterans organization shared the article, turning Deborah's mindful branding into a public relations disaster. She tried to spin it, posting a video about her commitment to harmony, but it backfired when someone leaked footage of her yelling at a chicken for daring to poop near her Range Rover. That clip made it to late-night TV, and Cadillac Cassie became a punchline. My farm, meanwhile, was thriving. The cows were content, the eggs were selling, and my mailbox overflowed with support letters from neighbors and strangers alike. One woman dropped off a peach cobbler with a note that read, "For standing up to city slickers." I didn't need it, can't be too careful, but the gesture warmed me. The best news came a week later. Serenity Fields LLC withdrew its zoning application. No explanation, no apology, just a quiet retreat. That night, I celebrated with Hank and Ellen on my porch, grilling corn and sipping root beer as the sun sank over the fields. But as we laughed, Hank squinted down the road. "You might want to see this," he said. A moving truck was parked outside the Mitchells' gated estate. Deborah was barking orders at two movers who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. Boxes flew into the truck, her voice sharp as a whip. She was leaving Willow Creek, her dream of a yoga utopia crushed under the weight of her schemes. The next morning, I found a note taped to my harvester's side mirror. Handwritten, 3 lines, "I underestimated you, Tom. You fight dirty, but fair. I'm gone. Move that carrot's yours now." I stared at it, the crumpled Cadillac still sitting in my driveway like a battle scar. It didn't feel like a win, exactly more like the end of a long, muddy fight. I wasn't sure what to do with the car yet. Scrap it, sell it, turn it into a planter? For now, it stayed, a sun-faded reminder of what happens when you block a farmer's barn. The town threw a small festival for Agriculture Week, and Ellen had the idea to showcase the harvester. We parked it by the main tent, draped it in streamers, and hung a sign. "Emergency Response Vehicle." Kids climbed into the driver's seat, pretending to mow down imaginary SUVs, while their parents swapped stories about Deborah's downfall. I gave a short speech, thanking the community and ending with a line that stuck. Farming's not just about crops and cows. It's about holding the line when someone tries to pave over what matters. As the festival wound down, I thought the saga was over. Deborah was gone, her Cadillac a relic, her retreat plans dust. But a week later, I noticed a new sign near my fence line. Cheap foam board nailed to a post. "Private meditation access. Do not disturb." The logo looked suspiciously like Deborah's old branding. I followed the trail to a canvas tent in the woods, where a guy in linen pants was humming over a singing bowl. He claimed he was part of a new spiritual venture with permission to use the land. Permission from whom? "Deborah," he said, serene as a monk. I told him to pack up or meet Hank's cattle dog, who wasn't fond of strangers. He scurried off, but the message was clear. Deborah might be gone, but her influence lingered like weeds. She'd sold her investment properties to shell companies, and now these new age types were popping up, testing my boundaries. I filed a trespassing report, reinforced my fence, and took the Cadillac to the southern edge of my land. With a welder's help, I bolted it to a steel platform and mounted a sign, "Blocked this barn. Now guards the land. Private property. Keep out." It became a roadside attraction overnight. Tourists snapped photos, and someone made a Google Maps pin. The local tourism board offered to make it a landmark, but I declined. The car wasn't about fame, it was a warning. Deborah's ego had been crushed, but her shadow still loomed, and I wasn't letting my guard down. The Cadillac monument stood at the edge of my farm like a battered sentinel, its dented frame catching the Iowa sun. It had been 3 weeks since Deborah Mitchell fled Willow Creek, her yoga empire reduced to a string of viral memes and a trashed SUV. Life on my farm had settled back into its rhythm, cows mooing, eggs stacking, the hum of crickets at dusk, but the quiet felt earned, not guaranteed. Every day, someone stopped by to shake my hand or leave a note, and a kid even dropped off a hand-drawn comic book titled The Harvester Hero, where I was a grizzled vigilante saving livestock from yoga cults. I laughed until my sides ached. The story of the Cadillac Crunch had gone national. My inbox was flooded with emails from farmers in Nebraska, truckers in Texas, and even a retiree in Maine who dealt with their versions of Deborah. The footage of my harvester flattening her SUV had been remixed into everything from video game mods to ringtones. A local print shop started selling t-shirts with "Don't Block My Barn" in bold letters, and I'd see them at the feed store, worn by folks who nodded at me like we shared a secret. It was surreal, this fame for doing what any farmer would have done, but I didn't want the spotlight. I just wanted my land, my animals, and the peace to work them. Then came the final twist. One crisp morning, as the dew glistened on the grass, a man in a tailored suit knocked on my door. He introduced himself as a private mediator named Charles, working for Victor Mitchell, Deborah's husband. He slid a folder across my kitchen table, revealing a settlement offer number so high it could have bought half my farm outright. In exchange, they wanted two things. I would remove the Cadillac monument and agree to silence about the dispute. Essentially, they were trying to buy my quiet. I leaned back, coffee mug in hand, and studied Charles. He was polite, professional, but his eyes betrayed a man who knew he was selling a bad deal. "What's this really about?" I asked. He admitted Victor was tired of the bad press. The Cadillac Cassie memes were hurting his tech business, and Deborah's failed retreat had spooked their investors. They wanted to wipe the slate clean. I told them I'd think about it, but I already knew my answer. That afternoon, I sat down with Ellen and Hank. Ellen read the offer and snorted. "They think they can buy you off like you're some city stooge," she said. Hank just grinned, scrolling through a new meme of Deborah's scream overlaid with a tractor engine's roar. I wrote a letter back, using their glossy folder, and kept it short. "Keep your money. I've been paid in full by a town that stood by me when the air was too hot to breathe." I mailed it and turned my focus to the farm. The Cadillac stayed where it was, now a local legend. Tourists stopped to snap photos, and kids posed with toy tractors in front of it. The county dropped its fraud investigation into Deborah's forged signatures, but the HOA ousted her from their board, and her name vanished from Willow Creek's social scene. The serenity tint in the woods was gone, and the New Age types stopped showing up. It seemed Deborah's influence had finally dried up. But I wasn't naive. I kept my gates locked, my documents organized, and my harvester fueled. One evening, as I walked the fields, I noticed a red ribbon tied to the harvester's Railingen anonymous thank you. Maybe from a neighbor, maybe from the universe itself. It felt like a full stop on the saga. The battle was over, the land was safe, and the community had held the line. A week later, a family in a beat-up minivan pulled up. A boy, maybe 10, hopped out, clutching a toy tractor, his eyes wide as he stared at the Cadillac monument. His parents asked if they could take a picture with the barn and the famous car. I nodded, watching the kid grin like he'd met a superhero. As they drove off, I realized why this mattered. It wasn't about me or Deborah or even the Cadillac. It was about standing up when someone tries to bulldoze what you've built, whether it's a farm, a family, or a way of life. The following weekend, Willow Creek held another community event, a barbecue, to close out Agriculture Week. The harvester was parked proudly by the barn, still wearing its red ribbon. I gave another short speech, thanking the town and ending with a nod to the future. We don't just grow crops here. We grow roots. And no one's pulling those up without a fight. The crowd cheered, and for the first time in months, I felt the weight lift completely. Deborah was gone for good, her plans reduced to a cautionary tale. The Cadillac stayed, a rusting reminder that arrogance doesn't win against grit. I never took Victor's money, and I never spoke to the press again. The farm was enough, its fields green, its animals content, its fences strong. As I sat on my porch that night, watching the stars over the corn, I knew I'd done what needed doing. And if another Deborah ever rolled into Willow Creek, I'd be ready, with a town behind me and a harvester that knew how to push back. Thanks for joining me in this wild ride through Willow Creek, where a farmer, a harvester, and a community took on entitlement and won. What do you think about the story? Was I right to drive over that Cadillac to save my cows, or did I go too far? How would you handle someone like Deborah in your own life? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear where you stand on justice, confrontation, and standing up to bullies. Let's get the conversation going.